because of a lack of training places, as well as the cost of living in London. Patient safety isn't at risk as the gaps are filled by agency nurses, but that comes at a cost to the health service. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Messer.
These student nurses will be the next generation staffing London's hospitals. But back in December, they were out protesting over cuts to their training bursaries. Cuts, they say, will lead to fewer people wanting to enter the profession.
My NHS bursary is my lifeline for my education and these opportunities.
Danielle Tiplady, who's training at King's College, organised that demonstration and one planned for this weekend. She wasn't surprised at news today from a Royal College of Nursing survey that showed there were more than 10,000 vacancies in the capital's hospitals.
On my placements, I see nurses go without breaks. I see nurses being able in a 12-hour shift not be able to go to the toilet because they're working so hard to care for their patients that they can't care for themselves. So it doesn't surprise me at all. And in London, I think it's a particularly stressful environment because of the amount of people here. So that just contributes to it.
The figures come from an RCM Freedom of Information request. They show there were 10,140 nursing vacancies across London, a vacancy rate of 17%. Some hospitals were even worse. London North West Healthcare had a rate of 30% last July, Epsom and St Helier was 22%, and Kingston and Croydon both had rates of 20%. Rates, the Royal College say, are putting extra pressure on full-time staff.
Those staff are working beyond what might be reasonably expected to make sure that services stay safe and that patients are well cared for. That's a situation that cannot be allowed to go on forever, and so a remedy has to be found, and that remedy is to increase the number of training places and for the government to lift the pay cap.
Elizabeth Anyonwu was a nurse for 40 years. Now she's part of the process of training the next generation as a professor of nursing. Her students, she says, facing tougher times than she ever had to.
As a Londoner, I'm actually quite worried about the future of nursing in London. It faces a crisis and it has to be addressed by the government, the NHS and the universities as soon as possible.
In a statement today, the government said it didn't recognise the Royal College of Nursing figures. It said there were more than 3,000 more nurses in the capital than 6 years ago, and said it was running campaigns to get experienced nurses to return to the profession. Carl Mercer, BBC London News.
A psychologist who worked at the failed London charity Kids Company faces being struck off after admitting being high on drugs while working with vulnerable young people. She also tested positive for cocaine during a random drugs test. We can join Catherine Carpenter, who's been at the hearing. And Catherine, first of all, what was Dr. Winter's role at Kids Company?
Well, she was a newly qualified clinical psychologist, and she was based at the Urban Academy, which was basically the charity's educational wing. It was for over 16s who'd been excluded from other forms of education. And the events the tribunal heard about today centred really about one night in January 2014, when we heard that Dr. Winter had been out with a colleague drinking in Brixton. They decided to go on to a club in Vauxhall and brought some of the drug MDMA on the way. They took it at the club when they got in there in a toilet cubicle, and then they saw two of the clients they worked with at Kids Company also in the club. Now what happened next is really the crux of this hearing. Dr. Winter's colleague claims that later on they all took some of the drug together, Dr. Winter offering it to one of the clients. Dr. Winter denies that ever happened. She admits being high that night, but says she never took drugs in front of her clients or offered them any.
And Catherine, this will be more unwelcome attention for the charity.
Yes, it was forced to fold in August last year amid allegations of financial mismanagement. Today we heard a bit more about its inner workings. Dr. Winter's colleague says that when she first asked her mentor what she should do about the alleged incident that night, she was told not to say anything, to keep quiet. At a later date, she was told perhaps she should go directly to the charity's director, Camilla Batmangeli, because her own immediate manager might not be competent enough to deal with it. There was then an internal investigation after it emerged that Dr. Winter had had one of the clients back to her flat to stay one night, and also that she had failed a random drugs test, testing positive for cocaine. Now, the person that led that investigation said that he found her to be a very engaged and involved professional, but she has clearly found these proceedings very distressing indeed. At one point, she broke down entirely in the courtroom and had to be helped out in floods of tears. but she has got more of this to go through. The tribunal's expected to continue into early next week.
Catherine, thank you. Miserly, that's how the mayors describe the Treasury's approach to compensating homeowners affected by HS2 and Crossrail. It comes on the day a group of residents from West London gave evidence to MPs about how their lives will be blighted by the construction of the high-speed rail link, which could take up to a decade. Aisha Baksh reports.
This area here, the area the other side of the road, and down at the bottom of the street in the south will be a huge construction site.
For Amanda Souter, the fight against HS2 is more than just a battle over her backyard. She and her neighbours near Old Oak Common in West London fear it will make their lives a misery.
If I lost this house, I'm 57 years old, I would end up probably not even being able to buy myself a bedsit. So my future looks really bleak.
This freight depot is set to be turned into a major station for the proposed high-speed rail link between London